Hello and welcome to the latest in Redwood's podcast series, where we're talking to SAP experts and those on the front line to look at some of the technical issues and challenges around SAP and finance processes. I'm Andy McCue, tech journalist and editor, and I'm joined by finance transformation expert Adrian Li. In this episode, we'll be exploring some of the challenges around multi-level cost and revenue allocations in SAP and some of the problems that can arise around that, how automation can help, and how you can achieve greater accuracy and efficiency of what is an essential finance process. So Adrian, diving straight in here, multi-level cost and revenue allocations. It's a complex and time-consuming process, but at a very simple level, it's fundamentally about how much it costs an organisation to make something, what they charge for it, and what the margin is on it. And clearly, they need to get those figures right. So just give us, from a cost perspective of this process, just talk us through how that might work, for example.
Yeah, so in most organizations, the way they structure the business is in terms of what are called cost collectors or cost pools. So it might be a cost center, so a marketing cost center that does all of the marketing work, or it could be a machine on the shop floor. How much does it cost to operate that machine? And then obviously you can measure the output from that machine. How many widgets does that machine make per hour? And that will then give you a measure of what the cost of running that machine is on the production line, and then how much of that cost is attributed to each of the widgets that you make that you then sell to your clients. And the cost will include everything. It's the cost of operating, for example, that machine, the power that it uses, supervision, maintenance, repairs, and depreciation of the asset, the machine itself, will be part of the costs for that particular item.
So a lot goes into it. And when we talk about multi-level costs, referring back to that example, what does that mean?
Yeah, so the machine is a good example, because if you look at the different types of costs that are associated with running a machine on a production line on a shop floor, costs flow into the collection point, if you like, the cost pool for that machine in a variety of different ways. So you've got the direct cost, if you like, of that machine, which is £1 million machine. It lasts for 10 years and it will be depreciated over that 10-year life cycle. So that's a direct, if you like, cost attributed to that machine. But you also have the supervision and the running and the maintenance of that machine. So, and those costs themselves, so the supervision, the running of the production line, the running of the maintenance function, all of those types of services are run from other cost collectors or cost centers within the business. So the idea is that as you collect the cost of running your factory maintenance function, you can then attribute or allocate those costs to each of the machines and the production lines where you're creating the widgets or the products that you sell to your clients. So by definition, you have this sort of multi-level process, because a supervisor will have their own time. There'll be costs that are allocated to the supervisory cost center, whether it's holiday pay, pensions, national insurance, and so on. And it's not until those costs are passed through into the supervisor pool, if you like, that then those supervisor costs can be allocated to the machine, the production line itself.
Yeah. And then so on the revenue side, then how does that work?
Yeah, so on the revenue side, it's about really taking a view on what is the output from the machine. So you've got this £1 million piece of equipment. How many widgets does it produce? How much does it cost to run that machine? And therefore, what share of those costs is allocated to each widget that you make? And the idea then is that you have a real cost of production for each of the widgets that you're making. And that then gives you a view for setting selling price and measuring the margin when you sell those items.
And so it's clearly, there's a lot of complex calculations here and they need to be conducted in a certain sequence as well. So otherwise, you're going to get all sorts of issues. So why is this a challenge, or why can this be a challenge in SAP? What are some of the issues that people have to deal with?
Yeah, so the real challenge is making sure that you do the allocations and the apportionment of costs in the right sequence at the right time. So, for example, you can't allocate the cost of running the machine to products and customers until you've collected all of the costs, direct and indirect, that relate to running that machine. So if you allocate a cost of, say, just the depreciation, you're not really getting a true value of the costs for each widget that you make, because you're completely ignoring supervision costs, maintenance costs, and so on. So the problem really is to make sure that you collect all of the costs in the right sequence before you then start to allocate those costs elsewhere within the business, whether it's to products, to customers, or combinations. And that is the challenge. That is the issue that is created here, is not doing things in the right sequence, in the right way, and then at the end of it getting the wrong results because you've not attributed all of the right costs to the products and to the customer combinations.
And going back to this fundamental concept of how much does it cost me to make it, what do I sell it for, and what's my profit margin? What's the obvious business impact, I guess, of getting that calculation wrong?
Yeah, a major business impact. So you could, for example, be selling a widget for $100 per widget, €100, £100. But actually, when you look at the real cost of making the item, it could be costing you more than you're selling it for, simply down to the fact that you're not collecting the costs accurately, you're not allocating the costs accurately, and so on. So clearly there's an impact on margin. There could be an impact on pricing before that. So if you haven't got accurate product costs or costs to serve certain clients, your Amazons and people like that, there are certain maybe additional costs that you need to take on board when you're selling to clients like Amazon and so on. Without getting those costs right, you can't set a price that is going to give you the margin aspirations that the business needs in order to be effective.
Yeah. And so what are some of the ways that finance and IT people, or finance IT people, kind of deal with this at the moment?
Yeah, again, it's one of those where you have teams of people who manually kind of break down the process into multiple steps. So step one might be collect all of the direct costs, make sure you've accurately collected all of those direct costs, the depreciation for the machine, the supervisory costs, the maintenance costs, and so on. And once you're confident that you've collected all of those costs correctly, you then move on to the next step, which is to take all of those costs, like the maintenance costs, and to allocate those to machines and production lines. So it's a very manual process that's broken down into steps, with checks and balances at the end of each step and at each level before you move on to the next level. Because again, if you get it wrong, the consequences, you have to back out the errors and then redo it again correctly.
Yeah. So that's obviously one way of tackling it. But as you mentioned, lots of highly skilled, expensive people spending a lot of time on that. And even then, I'm guessing there's still the chance for errors to get through. So, how do you do this better? How can automation improve this?
Well, automation will give you the possibility to really map the whole end-to-end process and have automation execute that for you. So rather than have, if you like, smart, highly skilled people breaking things down into bite-sized chunks and then manually managing it, you can have the automation literally do the same thing. But instead of having to wait for the previous step to happen, it can then execute all of the steps where there are no dependencies on the previous step occurring successfully. So you can get a quicker end result because it can execute everything where there's a lack of dependencies or it doesn't need to take on board dependencies straight away. And where there are dependencies between allocations, it can make sure they're done in the right sequence, in the right way, and it can stop the process if there is a problem and tell somebody to intervene to correct the problem before it moves on. So it's also eliminating that potential latency of having to wait for each step to complete in a dependency chain, but also then eliminating a lot of the manual effort in managing that process and executing the process too. And that will then give you the reliable sort of and accurate costs of products and services that are really important to help companies achieve their goals.
Yeah. So I mean that kind of sums up the benefits of that. I mean, really, and it comes back down to, as you said, eliminating the manual effort and making it easier to correct errors, and ultimately the business impact again, isn't it? It comes back down to that major impact that this process can have on your results and your whole business.
Absolutely, it's one of those areas where getting this right is fundamental. Product costing, for example, is really important. As we said earlier, in setting realistic pricing, where you know you're going to be making the margins that you aspire to make, but also taking on board things like if there are certain distribution channels or clients that you deal with where there are disproportionately higher costs to serve those clients, then you can take on board that in your pricing strategy, and then the collection of those costs when you start to look at the profitability of doing business with those organizations too.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Adrian, for your insight into this topic. Please do listen out for more in this series around SAP and finance IT. You can find out more about this topic and finance automation in general at redwood.com, and go to our YouTube channel under Redwood Software for more podcasts and videos around this. Thanks for listening.